So the Price of Peace premieres in April, and it's a 1-hour-long documentary
Right.
with a compelling look at military and diplomatic deterrence and the roles they've played in national security and foreign policy. Your career spanning over 50 years, you have a unique viewpoint. And explain how this is intertwined throughout the documentary.
Well, I think it's extremely important for American citizens to understand what provides safety and security for us as a people, for our nation. And I particularly hope that the people will view this documentary and will have their children view it with them so that they can begin to understand what we're dealing with in that nasty and sometimes dangerous outside world where we have to address. There are two really key points in the documentary. One is the idea of deterrence, and simple explanation, what is deterrence? If I say, if you hit me, I will hit you back. And my hitting back will be stronger, so strong that any rational person would decide not to hit me in the first place. That's deterrence. Right. And the other big issue that's raised in this 1-hour documentary is that appeasement can often lead to more war, not less. And classic appeasement incidents are discussed in this film. But let me stress that this is not 1 hour of talking heads at a table.
Okay, good.
This is outside. It's a relief, I know. They go out first to Kenya, and they look at how Maasai tribesmen deter attacks on their prized possession, their cattle. And it operates at that level. I would argue it operates at the house. When you tell your teenage child, be home by midnight, and you're not, and they're not home, then you have to follow up. You have to somehow carry out the implicit threat that was in that first statement, be home by midnight or else. And if you don't, you lose your deterrent capability. And if you do, you have a lasting effect on the child. Well, the same is true if the child happens to be a dictator in North Korea. You have to be credible, you have to have the capability to carry out your threat, and you have to have the credibility to know on the other side, the receiver of the threat will understand that you actually will do what you're threatened to do if they fail to comply with your rules or your requests. So it's an interesting view. So they go from these Maasai tribesmen in Tanzania to an incident, the very famous appeasement of the Nazis by the British, and the famous Munich Agreement, where Neville Chamberlain came back from a meeting with Hitler and said, we will have peace in our time. And what he really did was he convinced Hitler that they weren't going to protect Czechoslovakia, so he took the Sudetenland, part of Czechoslovakia, and then he saw that worked, so he took the rest of Czechoslovakia, and then he invaded Poland. And then we really did have World War II. When you play the tape backwards, you can see at that very moment that Hitler was threatening to invade Czechoslovakia, it was possible to stop him, but we failed to do it. And that's the price of appeasement.
And we failed to do it because he didn't back up his words with action. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, he promised that he would just take the German-speaking part of Czechoslovakia and nothing more. He'd be satisfied. But the real message he got from the British moves was that they weren't going to protect Czechoslovakia. And so he could take the whole thing, which he went ahead and did. And that's the risk of appeasement, that if you try to satisfy someone who is aggressive and who is not really answerable or doesn't feel answerable to anyone, then you may tempt them to try a little more, to try to take more. And this is brought out in the documentary. They go on to all the way across the world to the Falkland Islands. Mm-hmm. And they give another interesting example where the British reduced their military presence on the Falkland Islands. It's quite a long way from Britain. And there was a military coup in Argentina, and they decided they need to do something spectacular. So they invaded the islands. And they go to the islands and they interview people who were there during the invasion who say, they woke up one morning and they saw Argentinian troops roaming around. Mm-hmm. And then they were all assembled into the one big hall in the main city, Stanley, and they realized they were prisoners. Mm-hmm. And this happened overnight. But the miscalculation, though, was on the Argentinian side when they realized they didn't realize that Maggie Thatcher was not going to stand for it. And she sent an army, 4,000 troops and warships to recapture the islands. So she had the capability and she had the will, but they had sent a misleading message, I would say, to the Argentinians over the course of a couple of years. So that's another important element that the film brings out. And they do it, as I say, in these sort of dramatic examples.
Right.
Another big segment takes place in Korea, and a good friend of mine, Major General Brian Bishop, was commanding the Air Force side of the operations, and he explains how North Korea has to be deterred, but North Korea is not crazy. Kim Jong-un is not a maniac. He's not irrational. He understands the limits of his power. And we have to play that. We have to use that in the negotiations that the president has set up. And I hope we do. I hope we have the people around the table who understand how to play that game.
Well, I think what this documentary, and it's an extremely timely documentary, the president will do for people is, again, history is our greatest teacher. History is weaved throughout this documentary, and it has real-time implications, as you just spoke about with North Korea and with Russia. And I think I could give you 3 examples of the previous administration where they were a lot of talk but no action, whereas it's kind of the flip side now, particularly with North Korea, pushing North Korea to the negotiating table for the first time ever.
Well, not exactly. Actually, we have a very nasty experience with North Korea because in 1994 they signed an agreement to get rid of their nuclear program. And then until 2002, they said, "Oh, I'm sorry, we forgot to tell you. We lied about all that, and we've had a nuclear program in secret all along." So that we have a history with them. Clearly. Yeah, it's a matter of we have a very dangerous adversary. Being a diplomat, I have to say that to start off with, you have to have that ability to strike. So we have the best equipped, the best trained, the best period military in the world by a huge margin. Do not believe Putin's propaganda about how strong he is. It's nonsense. Putin brought an aircraft carrier to Syria to operate off the coast of Syria. They had so many crashes that they had to take the planes off the aircraft carrier and put them on land. We have 11 fully operational aircraft carriers that are twice the size of that one Russian carrier. That's just one example. That we are so much better than the Russians that we need not fear that aspect of our capability. What we have to combine it, though, with is a negotiating strategy that brings them to the table and identifies what we're willing to put up with and what we're not willing to put up with, and they will come back to us with the same list. So we have to be prepared for that, and I have to say that the State Department right now is very weakened by what's going on there. And it's a sad thing. We don't have an ambassador in South Korea. No. That's crazy. That's just unconscionable. And we don't have an assistant secretary of state for Asia. When we've got all these China problems, we've got all these Korea problems, and we've got all these trade issues.
Yeah.
So we need to turn that around. We really need that because the military is half the equation. You'll see in the Price of Peace documentary, Brian Bishop, a major general, saying, "Look, I've got one piece of the pie here, but eventually somebody's got to sit down and talk to these people, and that's not his job. You can't talk. Right. That's where you need experienced people, and you need people who know when they're being played, who can play the game better than the people on the other side." I sat across the table from Soviet negotiators for 10 years, and they are slick, well-educated, adept at negotiation. They study the art of negotiation, and we have to have the same capabilities. Just like you have to have a better aircraft carrier, you got to have a better negotiator so that you win those negotiations.
Right, and as the president is pushing and escalating the trade issues with China, with yet a kind of broken system behind him, do you believe this is dangerous?
I think he's gotten off to a slow start, but I think he can recover that. He needs to, he can't cover the whole world. He can't learn the issues in the whole world in a year. So he's got to pick and choose. Obviously, we've got a beginning of a trade war going on with China.
Right.
Their response has been sort of low level, not extreme, although here in Michigan it's hurting badly because it happens that two of our major exports, blueberries and cherries, are on the Chinese list. Mm-hmm. I was talking to a guy last night. He's got 60,000 pounds of cherries in a container headed for China right now. And he doesn't know, who's going to pay the extra duty, and is he going to have to bring it back to America? So these things have implications, and they need to be thought through in their entirety. What I really enjoyed about The Price of Peace as a documentary was, one, that it wasn't just talking heads. It really illustrates in a graphic way what are the implications, what are the results that come from both appeasement and deterrence. I mean, we've got they talk about the nuclear arsenal in the show, and we've got a hugely powerful capability that we don't want to ever use, and that kind of gets to the problem of Iran and North Korea. If Iran gets a nuclear weapon, then Turkey will insist on having one, and Saudi Arabia will insist on having one.
Right.
And so now you've got a three-cornered competition, and of course we never talk about it, but the Israelis have them too. So you've got a lot of players. We don't have any experience dealing with a nuclear standoff involving multiple players. We've only had the U.S. and the Soviet Union, and the India and Pakistan have had India and Pakistan. So that'll be a lot more dangerous. Same thing with Iran. Same thing with North Korea. If they get nukes, South Korea and Japan are going to say, we probably should have them too. And you're then in a much more unstable position. Neil Ferguson is one of the people they do talk to in the documentary, Price of Peace. And he said, if we don't prevent that in both of those theaters, in 25 years, he suspects we will have a nuclear war, which is something we absolutely don't want to happen.
Right.
So, we've got a lot at stake, and it's very timely. This documentary is showing all over the country. It began showing yesterday. It's depending on your local situation, you can find exactly where and when, but it'll be showing throughout the month of April. It's 650 stations, and will continue on into May. We showed it. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You showed it.
Well, we showed it here in northern Michigan, and 600 people showed up at our venue because they want to know. They want to know what is going on. Why do we spend so much money on defense? What does it get us? And these issues are basically addressed in this really fine documentary, which I'm very happy to be associated with.
Yeah, I believe it is a timely new documentary, The Price of Peace.
Mm-hmm.
I could continue talking to you because it's all fascinating, and it all ties back to, I think, what all of us are concerned about is our relations with Russia, our relations with North Korea, our relations with China, our relations with, the entire international community right now, which is changing.
It's changing, and we always. I'm inherently optimistic, so I always hope we make it better. And sometimes we get there, and sometimes we achieve that, and we can see missed opportunities sometimes. I teach an online course at Norwich University, a terrific school which combines military people and civilians, and their campus is in Vermont, but I teach online, and these students really are the future diplomats and the future military leaders. So I get a chance to, talk to them about this complex mix that's the precise thing that Price of Peace is really dealing with.
Right.
That, it's not, we have to have the best military, but we have to have the best negotiators too. It's a combination. It's kind of a 1-2 punch, I would say.
All right. I have to ask one more question because I really have to ask it for you. What are your thoughts on President Trump and his negotiating skills with the international community and what he's shown so far?
The president has the responsibility. I've worked for 5 presidents, and both major parties. They all have a different style. They often come in with inexperienced people who served them in their campaign or in their prior life. And then over the first year or so, they begin to replace those people with experienced people. And that is going on now. And I'm hopeful it will continue because experience does matter. I'm sure Jared Kushner is a terrific guy, but I have dealt with the negotiators who've been talking to the Arabs and the Israelis for 25 years when I served in Israel, and there's no replacement for knowing what happened 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, no matter how smart you are. So, we need that experience factor brought in now. And that's the one thing that I think the president needs to accelerate. As far as his style, that's his style, and he's obviously put some people on their back foot, and maybe that's what's needed. And, he is the negotiator who built a $1 billion empire, not me. So I'm not going to say that he's wrong. The proof is going to be if we are safer and better off from his actions. And, you can't assess that day to day. I'd love to see him kind of confine his Twitter feed to domestic issues because I don't think foreigners really understand it. They don't know how to figure it out. They don't know if that's official policy or just a kind of a thought that he had at night. And that can be disconcerting, and it also can be destabilizing. And I think we're getting there. If you look back and when Kim Jong-un called the president a dotard, whatever that is, and the president very humorously responds, well, I never called him fat and short. We can all get a laugh and a giggle out of that, but this is serious business. And now we've moved on to, okay, let's really have a negotiation. And that's where we have to be. Okay.
Good stuff. Thank you. I don't want to take any more of your time, but it was great.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah.
Okay, terrific. Nice to talk to you.
Thank you, Jack. Take care.
Bye-bye.